Okay, so where were we when we left off? When we left off, we were talking about chapter 22. That is short-term, let me show you this so that I'm looking at it, you should see it too. Short-term economic fluctuations. And this is, in particular, we're talking about the Keynesian model. So this is our first model of economic activity. And so this is our first attempt at not trying to measure things, but to understand them. Okay? And yeah, and so let's see, where were we? I think we were page 19, perhaps. Okay, that's not working. Of course. There we go, Keynesian model. We were talking about the Keynesian model, and it's been a while, but what we were talking about is that we're going to have a model that's going to be super simple. The idea of the model is to simplify the world into the incentives. I'm a little distracted. Simplify the model into the simplest thing that we can understand, because the world is really complicated, and we want something simple that we can get our head around so that we can understand something that's going on in the world. So we're going to deliberately be unrealistic, and we're going to go all the way and be really unrealistic here, because it's our first one, right? And so our key assumption is that in the short run, prices are fixed. Firms have somehow set their prices, and the short run is going to be however long it takes them before they change those prices. So prices are fixed, and shopkeepers, producers, just sit there and they're waiting for people to come in at those prices. And if someone comes in, they'll produce the thing on demand. And if someone doesn't come in, they won't. So our story is going to be that recessions come from that there just isn't enough demand for people to be producing stuff. Now, obviously, we're being silly. That's not the way it works. I have this idea here that this is a society that only produces haircuts, because haircuts obviously get produced when people want them. They don't get produced. But in real life, if people don't want them, but in real life, of course, it's more complicated. Lots of things have to be produced a year ahead of time, right? There's all kinds of complications, and we've simplified the prices. So we're being silly. Like we're deliberately being way overly simplistic, but it's because we want to understand one thing and understand that well, and then we'll add to it, right? Yeah. All right. So this we did before, and so our basic starting point is we're wondering, how much do people spend, right? Because our story is going to be recessions come from people not spending enough to create full employment or normal level of employment, right? That's going to be our story. So first we have to say, how much do people spend? And by people here, I mean everyone who buys Irish stuff, right? Everyone who buys our stuff. So that's our consumers. Okay, here we got it. There we go. That's our consumers, which is consumption. Our firms, the amount that they plan to buy. The government, how much it buys, and foreigners, how much they buy. Right? So that's our planned aggregate expenditure. And we're doing this, the planned thing, is because we don't want to focus on how much they actually spend. We want to start focusing on motivation, right? Because here we're going to have a story where we're going to say, given this motivation, here's what happens to the economy. So we're stop being purely descriptive, right? We're not just saying, let's measure the economy, consumption, investment, right? That was fine. We could do that just as a measurement. It is what it is. We went out and measured it. But here we're starting to tell a story about why people behave in the way they do and how that affects things overall. Okay, so that's what we're doing. And so, sometimes things happen to you. Like firms plan on selling their product, but it doesn't sell. So they got a whole lot of stuff in the warehouse. And then they've invested in that stuff in the warehouse, but it's way higher than what they meant to, right? So investment and planned investment are not necessarily the same thing, because we're having inventories be investment, right? But because we're telling a story now, we're talking about motivation of people, we want to focus on the planned investment. We're not doing anything with this in this class, but it's useful to point it out, because it's important to see that we're doing something different than we were when we were doing GDP accounting. Right? In GDP accounting, we didn't care where it came from. We're just going to go out and measure it. Right? Lovely, but But here, we're trying to understand why people behave the way they do and how those incentives to behave the way they do affect the economy as a whole, right? And so now our C plus I plus G plus net exports, not quite the same. I mean, it's the same stuff, obviously, but it's a little different. Now it's how much they want to buy rather than how much they bought, right? And it's, that biggest difference there is in investment. The other thing that we're doing here that's different from what we did before when we were doing GDP and we were just measuring GDP, like the stuff you're doing for the exam. We're just measuring GDP. We said, okay, it's the market value of all the goods and services that we produced. Fine, okay? And so it is the amount that we produced times the price of the thing. The price telling us how important that thing is, in some sense, right? Not every sense, but in some sense how important it is. And so what we got was nominal GDP. The euro value of the stuff that we produced. We produced 100 million euros worth of stuff, right? That's what we learned. Okay, but that's not how much stuff we got. That's the stuff times how much that stuff cost, right? Here, now that we're getting into the model part, we are looking at real GDP. And so even though I'm saying C plus I plus G plus net exports, that's not really quite the same G or the same C that we had before. Right? It's very similar, like it's not totally, like it's in the ballpark. But now it's real consumption. How much stuff do you want to buy? Not how many euros do you want to spend on stuff, right? So we've gone through and we've taken that nominal GDP, if you want, and we've divided it through by the price level, right? So now all this stuff that we're talking about here is in real terms, okay? Like how much stuff? The value of the stuff divided by the price level. How many baskets of goods did people consume? How many baskets of goods did firms invest? And people buying houses as well, right? How many baskets of goods did the government buy? How many baskets of goods did the foreigners buy? Okay? Whereas before, in GDP accounting, it was how many euros worth of stuff did they buy? Here it's how many baskets of goods. So we divide through by the price level. Okay? So those are the two changes. We've switched it to motivation. Very subtly, but nonetheless important for our understanding what's going on. And we're doing everything in real terms now, not nominal terms, which is why we had to do that consumer price index whole chapter, because if you don't understand the real versus nominal, you don't understand any of this stuff now, right? So it's a small, subtle difference, but it's a really important difference. Now we're talking real. So we've kind of redefined these letters, even though they look the same, and we're going to treat them the same. We're going to think about it as real GDP instead of actual GDP. It's GDP divided by the price level. But it's important to notice that we're doing that. Right? Okay, I won't belabor it. It's not super hard and it's not super deep, but it is a thing that we did, right? Okay, and then we're going to have to put motivation, and we're going to have we did this before, so I'll be brief, but we have to have motivation on why people are buying what they're buying. So we go back, we have our four things, right? The amount that people want to spend is consumption, investment, government spending, net exports. All of these groups in real life have motivation. They got reasons why they're doing what they're doing. And in fact, all of these groups have multiple people in them, right? Thousands, millions of people are consuming. Everyone's got a different motivation. Right, so we're going to simplify all that down, and we're going to put motivation for these guys. And to start with, we're only going to do consumers. So our first model, this whole chapter, just has a motivation for consumers. Now, I always like to think of modeling as telling a story. Like you're telling Little Red Riding Hood, right? And we got Little Red Riding Hood's motivation, and Mom said take this basket to Grandma's house, that's her motivation. Yeah, we got it. And if you were the actor for that part, you'd say, okay, what's my motivation, director? You want to be a good girl and take it, you know, it's motivation. An interesting story has motivation of multiple characters. The wolf wants to eat Little Red Riding Hood, right? It says it's everyone's got some motivation. Here, it's really, really simple. We're only going to have one character that has motivation, and the rest is just going to be boring. So we're going to have a very simple model. It's not going to give us all the insights that we want about the economy, but it's going to give us that one important insight, the one that we're going for in this. It's going to make us understand the multiplier, and then we're going to add more motivations later. So here we're just going to say, what do consumers want? How do consumers behave? And our assumption is going to be that they behave according to this consumption function. And it's just saying, and we're going to say that the motivation is, if you have more income, you spend more. And if you have less income, you spend less. Right? That is just that simple. And again, the income is in real terms, like the how many baskets of goods worth of income do you have? If you have more, you spend more. If you have less, you spend less. Not necessarily all your income. You might save, right? And you might be spending out of wealth. You might have a whole wealth and your income is low, but you have all this wealth because you're a retired person that you saved up your whole life, and you might spend out of that. So it's not that your income and your spending is the same, but the higher your income, the more you tend to spend. At least the economy as a whole, not necessarily any individual, right? And so our consumption function is this, right? We have the autonomous consumption, the amount that you'd spend even if you had no income, spending out of your wealth, the society as a whole. And then y minus t is your disposable income. Y is the income that you have, and taxes is whatever the government takes from you, right? And that's what you're left over with, y minus t. And then some fraction of this little c is our marginal propensity to consume, your extra tendency to consume when you get more income, okay? Now, notice we put in y here, because remember there's three ways we can think about y, right? It's in real terms now, but we can think about it as the amount of stuff the economy produced, the amount that people spent in the economy, and the income that people have. Three ways to think about any sandwich, right? Here, we are thinking about it as income. Okay? And one of the troubles in macroeconomics for a new student is that we keep going back and forth between those three ways really quickly and easily, sometimes in the same sentence. But here, it's important to tell this story, to understand this function. You need to understand that the y here is income. As people made this much wealth, created this much wealth that came to them. This is the income that society as a whole made from all the stuff that it made. And that is its income for the year. Okay? And they might have some wealth as well, but so its consumption is not just its income, but why is its income, to tell this as a story. Okay. So we have two bits. We have the part that varies with income and the part that doesn't. Autonomous consumption is the part that doesn't vary with income, and induced consumption is the part that does. Okay. Just catching us up. We talked about this, we talked about all this. And so our consumption function looks like this. Importantly, it has an intercept that's greater than 0. That is, if the society has no income, they spend out of their wealth and they still purchase something. And then it is increasing as our income goes up, but at a rate less than 1. Okay, this is going to be important. Now, there's nothing in theory that says that marginal propensity to consume can't be above 1, but in practice it always is. As people get a little richer, people get a little more income, they spend some of it, they save some of it, on average for a society as a whole. So you think about it as 0.9 or 0.8 or something like that. Okay. And then we got this. I remember this from last time. Okay. Okay. So let's see, what do we want to do here? I forgot to erase all this stuff, but let me go through and do this. Like we did it very briefly last time, but it was a while ago, and also I think because this is a video, this is something you can watch a few times if you get confused, whereas that just sort of went by in class, and I think some people probably followed it, but a lot of people probably didn't. And then it's hard just from notes to go over that. So let me go through this. Because now, like, one of the nice things about this is I got a little board I can draw on, so I can do the math for you. So we have planned aggregate expenditure is equal to C plus IP plus G plus net exports. Right? That's our basic thing. And we're given this consumption function is equal to C bar plus little c times y minus t. And that's our whole model, right? We said we put some motivation into why people consume, but these other things, investment, and if it could turn into red, that would be, we got blue. Blue's nice. Government spending, net exports, we are not going to explain yet. Like we'll get to investment for sure in the next chapter, but here we're not going to explain them at all. They're just fell from the sky, right? It's a number like 100, totally outside of the model, not being explained by this model in any way yet. But at the moment, no. So all we're going to be able to do is explain consumption and to some extent planned aggregate expenditure. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this consumption function, I'm going to plug it into our planned aggregate expenditure. So we get planned aggregate expenditure is equal to C bar plus little c y minus t plus IP plus G plus net exports. Okay. Things that we're hoping to understand from this are planned aggregate expenditure and output. That's what we're trying to learn. Consumption as a whole, but the only thing that we're going to sort of learn about consumption as a whole is Y. Right? We're not going to learn about C bar here. Right? It's an important thing to learn about, but it's not going to happen here. We're not going to learn about marginal propensity to consume, and we're not going to learn about the tax rate. But we are hoping to learn about what people's income is, right? And therefore what their consumption is. Right? So there's a lot of things in this equation that we just had, right, with this and this and this and this and that and that. These are all things that we're not hoping to explain yet. Right? We'll get there, but we're not here now because the only thing that can really vary is this planned aggregate expenditure and this Y, and the rest are just sort of given to us. Right? They are what they are, right? Ideally, we'd explain them, but we don't have enough going on in this model yet to do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate everything on the right-hand side. I'm going to separate the stuff that depends on income and the stuff that doesn't. So the stuff that depends on income is, well, Y, this Y bit and the little little c connected to it. All this other stuff doesn't. So I'm going to separate it out. Planned aggregate expenditure is equal, multiplying this out, I get little c times Y, and then everything else in that equation I'm not even hoping to explain. So for example, C bar, I'm not hoping to explain. Minus little c times t, I'm not hoping to explain. Taxes are whatever they are. Marginal propensity to consume is whatever it is. We're not gonna understand it from this model. Maybe later, right? IP, again, totally autonomous. That is not explained, not part of consumption, not influenced by wealth or consumption, right? None of that stuff. By income, not wealth. Plus G plus net exports. So all of this stuff here, all of that stuff is autonomous. It is not influenced by income. And this stuff here is induced. It is affected by income. So some of the spending is affected by your income, and some of the spending is not. I should actually get that out of there and put the plus outside for clarity. Okay. So we got the induced bit and we got the autonomous bit. So this is a lot of letters to follow around, and it just makes a person dizzy, like you lose track of what you're doing when there's lots floating around. So I'm just going to define all of that autonomous stuff by a new letter, A bar. And this is purely for our convenience, because it's easier to understand what's going on with one letter than it is with a whole slew of letters, right? I don't know, at least easier for me. Right? So this A bar is going to be defined to be equal to all of the bracketed stuff. C bar minus little c times t plus planned investment plus G plus net exports. That's all the autonomous stuff. All of it, right? Just put it there, and then our equation becomes planned aggregate expenditure is equal to little c times y plus A bar. That's a very sad A bar. Let's try it again. That's our whole thing. Move that out of the way. Okay. All I've done here is we have our original equation up here. I've plugged in my consumption function, and then I've just put all of the stuff that doesn't depend on y all together, and all the stuff that depends on y I've separated it out, And then I just gave this stuff that doesn't depend on y a name because it's easier, right? Obviously, this line here is so much easier to see what's going on than this line here, right? This is just a bunch of spending that doesn't depend on how rich we are. Okay, here's the sleight of hand bit. Now, here's where the economics kicks in, right? Here, say, well, we got planned aggregate expenditure. How much we want to spend depends on autonomous spending, the spending that we're not going to try to understand yet, and this induced spending, which depends on income, right? So here, y is income. Let me put that down. But remember, there's three ways to think about every sandwich, right? There's three ways to think about y. Y can be income, like we have here, but y is also expenditure, because anytime you get income, somebody else must have given it to you. So all the income that you got must be someone else's expenditure. And so if we're adding up the economy as a whole, the income of the economy as a whole has to be equal to the expenditure of the economy as a whole, right? And it's also the stuff produced. But here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, on the left-hand side, I'm going to change planned aggregate expenditure to y. And that's a sleight of hand, but on the left-hand side, we have expenditure. And on the right-hand side, we've got income. Okay. They're both y, right? But left-hand side, we're taking the sort of manifestation of y, the expenditure, how much people spend. Well, that depends on their income. Okay? They're both y for the economy as a whole, not for any individual. For the economy as a whole, they're both y. We put them down that way. Okay. And then we know that they got to be the same y, right? So I got one equation, and all I need to figure out is what y is. Awesome. So I can treat those y's as they're exactly the same. This is the sleight of hand bit, right? On the left-hand side, we have expenditure. The right-hand side, we have income. But we know that those two have to be the same. Okay. They weren't the same when people were deciding, like in people's heads, they were, but in people's heads, they're not the same when they're deciding how much to consume. When they're deciding how much to consume, they're thinking, what is my income? And let me buy accordingly, right? But for the economy as a whole, expenditure and income have to be the same, okay? Not for any individual, but for the economy as a whole. So now at this step, when we've put everything together, we can say, well, look, expenditure has got to be equal to income. Call them both y, because they got to be the same in the end. And then we can find out what y is, right? We can find out what y is by subtracting cy from both sides. So we get y minus cy is equal to a bar, just subtracting cy from both sides. Right? And then I can factor this out. This is 1 minus c times y is equal to a bar. And then I can divide by 1 minus c. Can I? Well, I can't divide by 0, right? So whenever I'm dividing, I got to be a little careful. But we said that c is less than 1, right? So 1 minus c is some fraction. Right? So I can divide by that because I'm not dividing by 0. So I get y is equal to 1 over 1 minus c times a bar. And this is super important. And in particular, this 1 over 1 minus c, marginal propensity to consume, is the multiplier. This is the point of the chapter, right? I said, what are we going to learn here? We're going to learn the multiplier. And there it is. Why is it called the multiplier? Because, and this is insightful, it multiplies the autonomous consumption, the autonomous spending. So if the autonomous spending changes, output or income or expenditure, whichever you prefer, or all three actually, because they're all got to be the same, is going to go up by a multiple of the amount that autonomous spending changed. So for example, if autonomous spending goes up by 1, how much does income go up by? Well, 1 over 1 minus c times 1, right? So let me add a page. We have, just draw that out again. We got y is equal to 1 over c times a bar, right? And this is our multiplier. So if a bar goes up by 1, y goes up by 1 over 1 minus c times 1. If a bar went up by 10, y would go up by 1 over 1 minus c times 10, right? So it multiplies whatever changes happen with a bar. With autonomous spending, the multiplier multiplies that to get our output. Output goes up by the multiplier times that change. Okay. Well, what kind of number is this thing? Well, we said that c is less than 1 and it's greater than 0. Okay. By assumption, it didn't have to be, but whenever we measure it, like, it's not really a problem, but it could in principle be anything for an individual. But for economies as a whole, it's not. It's a high fraction. 0.9, 0.95, 0.8 is pretty low, like low. It's something like 0.9, right? So if, for example, the marginal propensity to consume is 0.9. That's plausible. That's a plausible number. I bet there's economies where it is actually somewhere around 0.9. That is, when people get a little more income, they get one more, a raise of 1,000 or whatever, their spending goes up by 90% of that. So if they get 1,000 extra in income, their spending goes up by 900. It's a very plausible number, right? Well, if that's the case, 1 minus c is equal to 1 minus 0.9, which is 0.1. Right? And so 1 over 1 minus c is equal to 1 over 0.1, which is equal to, that was not happy. Let's fix that. Which is equal to 10. Right, so a multiplier of 10 is quite plausible. Right? Now, real life, we're going to see that there's some reasons to think it might be lower than that. But just to start out, ballpark figure, a multiplier of 10 is a plausible thing, right? Which means that if autonomous spending goes up by 1, income, GDP, will go up by 10. Right? Well, what was in autonomous spending? If I go back to the last page, well, it's investment, for example. Investment changes all the time, right? If firms think that the future looks bright, they're going to have very high investment. If firms think that the future looks not so bright, they're going to have very low investment. Investment fluctuates a lot. It's the most volatile bit. So if investment goes up by 100, GDP will go up by 1,000. And if investment falls by 100, GDP will go down by 1,000, 10 times the amount that investment changed. And so this is a big deal, right? For example, just to sort of like to say this is really a thing, you know the government's always very concerned about the construction industry, right? Because partly you want to get things built, but also it is a very volatile industry. Like when things look good, there's a lot of construction. When things look bad, there's very little construction. And so why like who cares? Like, okay, there's very much construction. You know, the rich guy is building some office buildings, like good for them, but you know, what's it does? You can think that way, but in fact, since it fluctuates so much, in years when it's bad, that means they're not just them, but they're taking everybody else down with them. The effect on GDP can be quite big because we have this fluctuation in investment. That's going to be multiplied by the multiplier, multiplied by some number like 10. Just to do another one, just to fix ideas, because I know people struggle with this a little bit. Let's suppose if c equals 0.8. Okay. If c equals 0.8, then 1 minus c is equal to 1 minus 0.8, which is equal to 0.2. So 1 over 1 minus c is equal to 1 over 0.2, which is equal to 5. Okay. So if the marginal propensity to consume was 0.8, which is low but plausible, then the multiplier would be 5 in this model. Like, don't memorize this formula. Like, I can change the model, it'll be a different formula. But this is give it our first pass at what the multiplier is. Okay. So this suggests that the higher the marginal propensity to consume, like 0.9, you're going to get a bigger multiplier, and the lower the marginal propensity to consume, you're going to get a higher multiplier. Now, this is all well and good, and it's lovely, and you should be able to do this math. Like, if I give you a new model, you should be able to do this. Not for the midterm, but going after that, you should be able to figure out what the multiplier is in a particular model. You should not, like, God help us, you should not memorize this formula. Because whatever model I give you will not be this. But you should understand how we got this and be able to get it yourself. Yeah, we'll see more examples as we go along. But what we haven't done yet is understood this thing. So that's our next step. But let me make that into another video. If I can figure out how to stop this one. Yeah, here we go. Stop this.